This may be the shortest recording I do on this 4-part series. I'm really just going to shut up right now and let you guys hear this little speech that Jordan Peterson gave. You saw him in the other video I played for you. The title is Postmodernism, How and Why It Must Be Fought. Now I'm going to shut up and let him tell you.
So I want to recommend a book first to everyone here. It's called Explaining Postmodernism, and it's by a gentleman named Stephen Hicks. And you need to understand postmodernism because that's what you're up against, and you're up against it far more than you know or think. And it's a much more well-developed and pervasive, pernicious, nihilistic, intellectually attractive doctrine than has yet come to public realization. It absolutely dominates the humanities and increasingly the social sciences in the universities. And what's happening, you see, someone once said, who unfortunately I can't remember, it might have been Friedrich Nietzsche, said that everybody is the unconscious exponent of a dead philosopher. And fortunately, the postmodern philosophers, most of them are dead, so that's a good thing. But that doesn't mean that their words aren't continually being spoken by people who are following in their wake, let's say. And it's not like any given person is absolutely possessed, say, by the spirit of postmodernism, because often they're not educated enough to know all the details about what it is that has them in their grip. But if you get 20 of them together, and they're all 5% influenced by the postmodernist ethos, you basically have the spirit of the mob that's a mouthpiece for that particular philosophical doctrine. And if you understand the doctrine, then you understand why things are progressing the way that they're progressing. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the doctrine, because it's not optional to understand this. It's absolutely crucial to understand this. You can't underestimate the power of ideas and also the power of words, of course, because ideas are expressed in words. But you see, the postmodernists completely reject the structure of Western civilization. And I mean completely. So I can give you an example in one term. Jacques Derrida, who's head trickster for the postmodernist movement, regarded Western culture, let's call it the patriarchy, as phallogocentric. Okay, so phallo comes from phallus, P-H-A-L-L-O. And so that's the insistence that what you see in Western culture is the consequence of a male-dominated, oppressive, self-serving society. And we might say, well, you know, societies do tend to be self-serving, and people in power do tend to act in their best interests, but a tendency is not an absolute, and that's one of the things that needs to be considered continually. There are no shortage of flaws in the manner in which we've structured our society. And compared to any hypothetical utopia, it's an absolutely dismal wreck. But compared to the rest of the world and the plight of other societies throughout the history of mankind, we're doing pretty damn well, and we should be happy to be living in the society that we're living in. So the first thing that you might want to note about postmodernism is that it doesn't have a shred of gratitude. And there's something pathologically wrong with a person who doesn't have any gratitude, especially when they live in what so far is the best of all possible worlds. And so if you're not grateful, you're driven by resentment. And resentment is about the worst emotion that you can possibly experience apart from arrogance. Resentment, arrogance, and deceit. There's an evil triad for you. And if you're bitter about everything that's happening around you, despite the fact that you're bathed in wealth, then there's something absolutely wrong with you. You know, the black community in the United States is the 18th wealthiest community, 18th wealthiest nation on the planet. Now, that doesn't mean there isn't such a thing as relative poverty, and relative poverty matters. It's an important political economic issue, and it's very, very difficult to deal with. But absolute wealth matters too, and Western societies have been absolutely remarkable in their ability to generate and distribute wealth, as you can tell by just looking around and taking a brief bit of consideration for the absolute miracle that even a building like this represents. So you have to educate yourself about postmodernism. Okay, so here's what the postmodernists believe. They don't believe in the individual. That's the logos part. Western culture is phallogocentric. Logo is logos. That's partly the Christian word, but it's also partly the root word of logic. Okay? They don't believe in logic. They believe that logic is part of the process by which the patriarchal institutions of the West continue to dominate and to justify their dominance. They don't believe in dialogue. The root word of dialogue is logos again. They don't believe that people of goodwill can come to consensus through the exchange of ideas. They believe that that notion is part of the philosophical substructure and practices of the dominant culture. So the reason they don't let people who they don't agree with speak on campus is because they don't agree with letting people speak. You see, it's not part of the ethos. Okay, so what else do they believe and not believe? They believe that since you don't have an individual identity, your fundamental identity is group fostered. And that means that you're basically an exemplar of your race, hence white privilege, or you're an exemplar of your gender or your sex or your ethnicity, or you're an exemplar of however you can be classified so that you are placed in the position of victim against the oppressor, because that's the game. And it's a post-Marxist sleight of hand, right? The old Marxist notion was that the world was a battleground between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, and that failed to have any philosophical or ethical standing, that argument, after the working class actually saw its standard of living massively elevated as a consequence of Western corporate democracy, Western free enterprise democracy, and also as a consequence of the revelations of everything terrible that had happened in every bloody country that ever dared to make equity and the Marxist communist dogma part of their fundamental structure, right? And nothing but murderousness and oppression. And so by the 1970s, it was evident that that game was up. The postmodernist Marxists just basically pulled a sleight of hand and said, okay, if it's not the poor against the rich, it's the oppressed against the oppressor. We'll just redivide the subpopulations in ways that make our bloody philosophy continue in its movement forward, and that's where we're at now. And so for the postmodernists, the world is a Hobbesian battleground of identity groups. They do not communicate with one another because they can't. All there is a struggle for power. And if you're in the predator group, which means you're an oppressor, then you better look out, because you're not exactly welcome. And neither are your ideas. So that's what you're up against. I would say it's time for conservatives to stop apologizing for being conservatives. And you don't apologize to these people. That's a big mistake. Apology, they read apology as an admission of guilt. You don't apologize and you don't back down. You young people that are out there who are university students, you need to take over the student unions. You need to take them back, because they're absolute snake pits, and they have been since the 1990s. Now, with regards to the universities, I thought at one point that the best thing to do would be to cut their funding by 25% and let them fight amongst themselves for the remnants, because it would force the universities to decide exactly what's important and what isn't. So I would say the humanities and much of the social sciences has turned into a postmodern neo-Marxist playground for radicals. The scholarship is terrible. 80% of humanities papers aren't cited once. And so what that means is that they write papers for each other and they sell them to libraries, and that's how the publishers make their money. No one reads them, but the publishers can print them because the libraries have to buy them, and they're buying them with your tax money. And so all of you who are sitting here are...
I'm going to pause that for 1 minute. If you don't know what he's describing there, he's telling you just how fast this new ideology of Marxism, communism, socialism, whatever it is. Back 13 years ago, 11, 12, 13 years ago, when I was in university over at Mizzou in Columbia, you sign up for History 101, Biology 2000, the black experience, the black versus white experience in America 205, whatever the class might be, but specifically in these anti-American humanities, sociology classes. It happens across in every department, but specifically what he's describing is the professor will write their own book and then put it on the required reading of the syllabus for the class, so the student has to go buy it. And what he's saying here is that 80% of these books that are being written that promote socialism, communism, Leninism, Marx, whatever you want to call it, and all of them at the same time, 80% of those books are not even being cited in professional publications. That's how one-sided and ideologically driven these narratives, these books, these mindsets of these professors are. And like he said, taking out student loans, paying for your kids to go to college, no wonder they're becoming radicalized. You're funding it. So back to his speech.
funding a postmodern, radical, neo-Marxist agenda that has its roots in the university, and your tax money is going towards that. And if you want proof of that, you just go online and look at the websites, especially of disciplines like women's studies, which is pathological right to the core. But it's not just women's studies, it's all the ethnic studies groups. It's anthropology, it's sociology, it's social work, and most of all, it's education. And OISE, for example, in Ontario, is perhaps, apart from the Ontario Human Rights Commission, the most dangerous institution in Canada. It should be defunded. It's as simple as that. They don't do the research they purport to do. They're not interested in at all in education. They're interested in the indoctrination of people as young as they can get their hands on, so to speak. Now, we need to figure out, our society needs to figure out how to stop shunting public tax money to radical left-wing activists. If we were doing that for radical right-wing activists, there would be an absolute storm. But it's happened incrementally since the 1960s, and it needs to stop. So that's partly what the conservatives, not only conservatives, but also liberals, true liberals in the English sense, are up against. I mean, what's happened also as a consequence of this postmodern neo-Marxist intellectual invasion is that the center keeps moving. It's moved way to the right now. So if you're a classic liberal, you've become a conservative. And so for all of you who are interested in pursuing the conservative agenda, there's a lot of classic liberals that you could be talking to. And then finally, with regards to talking to young people, you finally have something to sell to them, you know. It's not easy to sell conservatism to young people because they want to change things, and that's not what conservatives want to do. They want to maintain things. Well, now you've got something to sell to young people. You can sell them freedom of speech, and you can sell them responsibility. The left is selling them rights. You can sell them responsibility. And I can tell you, because I've received many letters of the sort that Gad was talking about, young people are absolutely starving for someone to provide them with a sense of responsibility and say, look, here's something worth living for, man. You know, you can find meaning in life with freedom, but freedom is a chaotic sort of meaning, right? And freedom isn't the sort of thing that makes people happy. It's the sort of thing that makes people troubled, because freedom expands your series of choices, and that makes you nervous and uncertain. So, but responsibility is another, not to say that that's a bad thing, it's a good thing, but it requires that you shoulder the responsibility of the freedom. But responsibility per se is what gives your life meaning, genuine meaning in the face of suffering. And young people they're starving for that. I've been teaching young people for 30 years, and mostly what I've been teaching them about is responsibility. It's like you're heirs to a great tradition. It's not perfect, obviously, but comparatively, there's nothing else like it that's ever been produced, and it represents a tiny minority of the human polities, most of which are run by murderous, antisocial, psychopathic thugs. And that's seriously. And so what kind of alternative is that? We've got this beacon of freedom and wealth in the West that works, although it doesn't work perfectly. And one of the responsibilities of young people is to find out what's at the core of that, the great core of that, the paramount importance of the individual and the divinity of speech, man. That's something to sell. It's what our whole culture is predicated on.
So that was a little 12-minute speech he gave there, and I hope you're sticking along towards the end to watch this. So now this is part 4 of 4. In the last 4 series, the last 4 parts of this video, whatever you want to call it, I've shown you Yuri, the KGB defector, who sat there in that hour-and-a-half long interview. I showed you about a 10, 12-minute clip of it, who told you exactly what the intentions are and how it works. We watched that interview between Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson, where he lays out the history of how this postmodern idea of putting different classes against each other, dividing and conquer, has been working. We read that open letter from University of California, Berkeley professor to the rest of his staff and faculty, where he's describing how they're being so one-sided and not giving any of the uncomfortable truths at the risk of being completely annihilated and canceled by American culture. I showed you some clips of people who are actually living out this book that I showed you, The Coming Insurrection, written by these very radical French and European leftists, that everyone I've been showing you continues to echo their sentiments, that the economy is the problem, that capitalism, the way of life, the American way, the individual is the problem. This isn't just that we disagree on a few policies, move one way or the other. This is that there's a very deep-seated nihilistic attitude that the individual is the problem, that the way of life America has set is the problem, and not like we've said and we all agree, it's not like America doesn't have its problems. I've shown you the different clips, like the woman up there at Chaz who is saying that they are very serious when they say abolish the police. It's not just a phrase, they actually mean it. And after that comes the courts and the prison system. So how much more evidence do people who are in the middle need to see? Those of you who vote Democrat, let me ask you this question. Those people who are protesting across the country, who are blocking down highways, who are throwing bricks through windows, the people who are here at the plaza protesting and burning things down and all of that, whatever, do you think those people are Democrat voters or Republican voters? If you traditionally vote Democrat, do those people share your ideas? If you vote Democrat this November, do you think your version of Democrat or their version of Democrat will be enacted? I say this all the time. You don't have to try to read between the lines. You just take these people at their word. There's something very, very, very nihilistic about what's going on in our country right now. And again, if you read this book, it's not that difficult to understand. And really, if you sit down with some of the people here in America, I've talked to a dozen of those protesters. I've talked to people over the last, say, 5 to 10 years who think just like that. And when you have $150,000 of student loan debt, you aren't working a career that really makes you happy, you've been convinced to put off a family until your 30s, focus on your career, and you see all sorts of media manipulation with the news who are constantly showing you a story, not the story. When you see things like the criticisms that university professor put out, who says that you guys are supposed to be one of the pillars of truth that the citizens look to for how to discern and live their life, and you're telling lies. It's not that difficult to imagine an entire section of our country becoming so disillusioned and nihilistic with the way of life that they say, you know what? F the police. Don't defund them, abolish them. Abolish the prisons. Abolish the court system. It's all racist. It's all built on white supremacy. And I think what Jordan Peterson says right here, I can't just give you 4 episodes of doom and gloom. There have to be some solutions, right? I think Jordan Peterson completely hits it right on the head, and I hadn't seen this until just a couple of weeks ago, but what he says is a cornerstone of this campaign I'm putting on. It's why I go pick up trash on the weekends. It's not because I like picking up trashing or I'm virtue signaling or something. It's because I'm trying to show you guys at home that one person can have an impact. Take on responsibility. If you're a teenager in college, if you're a teenager in high school, go get involved. Take on responsibility at student council, or like he says, student unions. Run for elected positions within your school. Try to show people some more common sense. Put yourself out there speaking very precisely. Don't just throw out these massive arguments that have all sorts of misnomers in them. Be very precise in your speech, but speak loudly and speak the truth. Take on responsibility for your community. Take on responsibility for your friends who are going through a fight. Say sorry to your family, your friends you've been fighting with. Go into work, and I don't care if you're a damn line cook. Make that kitchen the best damn kitchen in all of Kansas City for that night. Many years ago, I was working as a bartender, and I can remember that I was just not in the mood. And I don't remember the exact night, but I remember the exact week or so that this was going on. I was just not in the mood to go work in a bar. I was so filled with frustration. I shouldn't be here. I should be doing something bigger. I'm not living up to my potential. And I had 2 choices. I could have gone into that bar that night with all that frustration and resentment and whatever other negative emotions you want to describe, and I could have made that the most shitty bar for anyone to sit in that night. I could have gotten the drinks wrong. I could have put a lot of foam in the person's beer. I could have greeted everyone with a snarl. I could have not talked to, I could have left a sticky, dirty bar. I could have made my server's life hell. Or I could have taken the opposite. I could have, which is what exactly I did. I told myself, Ryan, you know what? You're going to be here for the next, 10 hours, 8 hours. This bar is going to be the best bar in all of Kansas City tonight. There's not going to be a better bar that anyone in Kansas City could go to, and it's a damn shame that the rest of the city doesn't know that. And that bar was clean, it was organized. Every time somebody came in, you greeted them, you treated them like an old friend, you made their drinks quick and really, really accurate, you made them really great, and you made that drink and that bar experience that night the best possible thing it could have been. And that was my little corner of Kansas City. And you know what started happening? People took notice. And over the next couple of months at that bar, I had more regulars than you could have imagined. And every night you came in, people were happy. And what I started doing was introducing this regular to that bar regular. And then all of these regulars who came in not knowing each other would come in randomly throughout the week. And then it was like the movie or the TV show Cheers, where everybody knew each other. And I immediately, that was one person, right? That was me. That was it. Now imagine if just in Kansas City, we've got a city of like 1 million people or so. Imagine if just 5,000 people did that. How much better the city would become in one day, in 1 week, in 1 month. You have the option. You have the choice. You have the choice to sit in your house and put down the blinds and say, just leave me alone, world, I don't want to be bothered. Or to go out with your anger and resentment and frustration and take it out on whoever's next to you, whoever comes in touch with you. And you also have the exact opposite choice. It is you. It is the individual. That's all I've got for you guys right now. I hope this 4-part series was good for you. I hope it really helped you to get a grasp on what we're dealing with, the mindset and the ideology, the players involved, the history of how we got here, the devastating effects on if we do not stop this, the logical result of where this progressive leftist ideology will take us. And I hope you got some hope and some ideas on how the resolution of this can go. So that's all I've got for you guys right now. Please share. I think the primary is in about 30 days, August 4th. Make sure to vote Ryan, Derks. Spread the word. Invest by donating to this campaign. And I hope to see you guys soon. Thanks.